Children's games incorporate all three types of folklore. Material folklore is incorporated in the items that children use to play the games, such as pigskins or their intestines that are kept to use for games, as mentioned in the interview with Eli, which unfortunately the audio didn't work, but you get the idea. Also, customary folklore is incorporated in the motions that children make during the games and the dances that might be associated with that. Verbal folklore would include the rules used for the games and also any songs that might be associated with the games that they play. I chose this topic after a mission trip to Haiti. Throughout the week, we tried to learn different children's games, and we tried to understand what we were supposed to do and how we were supposed to play. But as you can probably imagine, we didn't speak a lot of Creole, so it was really hard to catch on, and we didn't really know what we were doing. We just kind of made it up as we went. So I thought it would be really interesting to do more research on children's games and find out a little bit about the history and about the African connections. Did you get to observe any kids playing?
Many.
Okay. So what were some interactions that you noticed?
A very simple hand, similar to patty cake, that was easily transferred because I don't know Creole and they didn't know English. It was a game we could learn easily and quickly and play together.
Do you remember how it went? Do you remember any of the words?
Papa do, Papa something. That's all I remember.
Okay, what were the hand motions? Do you remember?
Kind of a patty cake, front hand, back hand, down, up, back and forth.
So you didn't notice any other games other than those two, though? What about... Oh, go ahead.
Basketball. They did play basketball at one of the places we stopped. And it was pretty amazing how familiar they were with the game and the rules and how it worked. I could tell they had some exposure to American basketball.
So it was cool to see the transfer between the two cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I was talking with Eli, who's from Haiti. He mentioned that there was a lot of fighting. That was a lot of how children interacted. Did you notice that to be true?
I don't remember seeing that, no.
Were there differences between the way street children interacted and the way that the children in the orphanage interacted?
Definitely the street children were less inhibited.
So you said you loved playing with the kids. How did you play with them? What did you do with them?
I played a lot of soccer. They really loved soccer. And they also loved wrestling.
Wrestling? Tell me about that.
Well, I didn't know this before I went, but they apparently loved WWE. So me and the translators kind of put on a show. I also found from Eli that other things like climbing trees and games like hide and seek are also popular in Haiti. As Gregory Mann points out in locating colonial histories between France and West Africa, it's also important to note that colonization also had an effect on the games that developed and on the people's culture and their view of the world. Eli's interview also brought to my attention a great class consciousness. He said that he was a fence boy, which meant that he didn't really interact with other children. However, the children that weren't fence boys would interact a lot more commonly. They would also be a lot more common to play non-American games. He also pointed out that children that weren't fence boys
also didn't have as much parent-to-child interaction, that adults weren't as involved in their lives. And so they were more likely to have more creative games and games that they'd come up with themselves because they really didn't have somebody there to teach them.
Climbing on you and pulling on you all the time, and you just in terms of being able to cool down with all those kiddos climbing on you, you had to just get out of there for a little bit. And the adults at the orphanage, I can't say I really saw them a lot. They would come in, they would cook, they would leave. There were a couple of adults that seemed very stern to the children. I have to say that bothered me a little bit.
In the area of northern Haiti where we stayed, there wasn't a lot of interaction between the outside world and the community where the people lived. And so we found that they were very curious about us, the adults and children alike. So it would somewhat skew what an outsider would see because, you know, the whole time you're a spectacle and they're like, Blancs, 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 and running out on the streets to see what you're doing. But we also noted that there was some interaction between children and adults. However, the adults kind of seemed to not really have a lot of difference in the expectations as the children. They pretty much did the same things. If the children helped, they were extremely hard workers, just like the adults. They did whatever they could.
They were very curious about us, and in the little compound area where we were, kids were always climbing over the wall, looking over the wall, reaching over the wall. Especially at mealtime was very difficult, knowing that we didn't have enough food to share with them. And so that was very, very difficult to experience that. But the children were very eager to be with us.
Can you describe to me what a Haitian orphanage looks like?
Several poured concrete rectangular buildings, extremely filthy, concrete floors, flies everywhere. I remember in the cafeteria, just horrified at the sight of all of the flies on the serving table where the kids' food was being passed out, just knowing how unsanitary that was, and desperately wanting a bottle of Lysol.
Within the orphanage, there was kind of the same interaction between the street children and adults. The adults really weren't present, and when they were, it was more not really as a parent-child, it was more as a dictator and a subject type thing. The headmaster wore a belt around his neck so that he would be intimidating, I guess. I don't know, to try to intimidate them into behaving. So as far as actually being a source of learning or, you know, coming up with games or that kind of thing, the adults really didn't contribute much to that. Another important thing to consider is that a lot of Haitian children have to contribute to their families financially. In the Greenwood Encyclopedia of Children's Issues Worldwide on page 96, it mentions that that's a major issue and that really affects their ability to develop games and even to have the time to play games, period. According to African Folklife by Huey Chatelain, the communal aspect of Africa is very important when playing games and just in everyday interactions. Did you notice that the way that the children interacted was different than what you'd find in America?
Like talking?
Just in general, like, were they more hostile toward each other? Were they more...
I'd say they were less hostile.
Less hostile? In what ways?
Well, they just seemed to not in any way... I mean, they just seemed selfless almost, which is something I really don't see in our society.
Okay, were there any differences in the way that Haitian children interact and the way that American children interact, just in general?
There were many similarities, but they were, they just seemed very eager to be with people. They were their expectations weren't as high to be entertained, and they would initiate playing and oftentimes interacting with American children. They almost seem to have lost the ability to play.
Melina Cruz also points out the importance of the laku, or the family union, in passing on oral traditions. Although in American culture, a lot of times traditions are passed through books because of the poverty situation in Haiti, there isn't a lot of writing. So a lot of times games and songs and any kind of folklore is going to be passed solely by word of mouth. There's not going to be any record of it. Therefore, you're going to find that there's a great mixing in that particular culture. There's going to be a mix of French, and you're going to have a mix of African, you're going to have a mix of American and Native American, just because there's really no set standard. So, at the end of this project, I found that the most beautiful part of Haitian games and Haitian culture is that it is such a wonderful mix of different cultures. You have African, you have French, you have American, and they put it all together, and you look at it and you're like, I really don't know what this is. But at the end, it's just everything. It's just like a soup or something beautiful like that. So I want to thank everyone for participating in this project, and I hope that you enjoyed.